All right. Good morning, everyone, or good day if you're on the East Coast. I'm your host, Goran Kimovski. Everybody knows me as Kima. I'm a CEO and co-founder of Infostrux. We kicked off last month with more of a technical overview of the different data architectures and the effort required to implement them, particularly in the cloud. Today, I'm very pleased to run a different format where we are having a chat with a successful entrepreneur in the BI space. Before I introduce Mark, this webinar is supported with my lovely co-host, Beverly. We invite people to post questions in the Q&A part of the Zoom screen. If you can look into your Zoom screen and look at the Q&A button, you will be able to post questions during the session, and Beverly will help us ask those questions as we move along. Mark, I invite you to turn on your camera, and I would love to ask you to start this with a quick introduction, quick overview of your history in the BI space. You and your family go way back with two products like Crystal Reports. Arguably, Crystal defined the early BI history. So I'm sure your background will be interesting to our audience.
Yeah, hi Kima, and really appreciate you bringing me on, and super excited about your new venture that you got going, and it's a pretty exciting new venture. So that's great, and yeah, just a quick high-speed pass, I guess, about my background, and then we can talk more about BI and analytics and all that. But so I've been a tech entrepreneur for 25 years. I built and scaled 4 different startups from the ground up, and funded all of them in very different ways. I've done sort of the family funding, which we did at Crystal. We can talk a little bit about that. I've done self-funded businesses, organic growth, VC-backed companies, strategic spin-out from a large enterprise. So I've kind of done the funding game in many different ways. I've run M&A processes and sold my own businesses. I had 4 exits in all of those businesses that were successful outcomes to large going concern companies. And they're all in the BI analytics space, most of those. And so that's kind of a little bit about my history. Today, I spend half my time being a board member and an investor in mostly in the startup ecosystem, which is kind of where a lot of my passion is. And then the other half of my time, I'm helping entrepreneurs, founders in startups, as well as leaders inside of existing medium to larger organizations with their innovation projects, and basically taking their ideas and getting them off the ground and helping them scale. So just kind of rewinding back to the Crystal thing. We started Crystal in the early 90s. It was, as you said, it was kind of probably the first early BI application in the market. The concept of EIS in the 80s existed. But, at the time, I always kind of, when I talk to entrepreneurs about their why now story, I think we had a very distinct why now at Crystal, and there was a lot of things happening. There was Windows was one, yeah. and everybody laughs, but Windows really it wasn't a thing back in the early 90s. And if you remember, Steve Jobs and, Bill Gates were battling over it was Next or Windows, and we bet on Windows. We were moving into new database technologies that were moving from PC type databases. You had, Microsoft Access, and you had these old school Btrieve and DBase, and all these Fox Pro, all these kind of small, and then client server came in. So we had client server, we had Windows, and then we had this, open database connectivity, ODBC. So there was all these kind of this confluence of things that really came together at the time that really pointed at someone needs to be able to, mine this data and dig this data out of these different systems and going to get created in this kind of open, operating system and platform. And so Crystal was kind of born from that. It was a garage startup, and we had no idea what we were doing. It was a family business of mine. I wasn't the only one involved. My brother was kind of the leader of the charge, and I was involved in it, and another number of other family members. And it was a classic garage startup that just kind of took hold and worked. And I think we did a lot of firsts in the industry that were quite unique. We can talk about them, but so from there we did Crystal. We ended up exiting Crystal in the mid 90s. We sold Crystal to Seagate. It went through a series of acquisitions to Silver Lake, and then it ended up inside of Business Objects, and Business Objects ended up inside of SAP, and that's where the Crystal product line lives today. So, lots of history there. We really kind of, I think we really coined the BI space, to be honest with you. We set a lot of firsts there. And from there, I went on and built a number of other companies. So I've sort of seen the analytics space through every technological evolution as we progress. We've gone from desktop reporting and Crystal to client server. I built another business in that. It was a very domain specific analytics solution in the contact center analytics and workforce optimization space. And then when cloud started to happen, I built a cloud, enterprise analytics play, a BI platform, which you were part of. And then I built another kind of version of a cloud analytics solution and platform a little later in the 2015 area. So I've kind of seen the whole evolution of how the technology's evolved and how BI has kind of moved along through those technological evolutions. And it's been an interesting, process to watch that unfold. And that's a little bit about my background. So
yeah, thank you. We can take this in so many different ways, but I think that is most interesting to me, and hopefully to the audience, is if you look back and think about 15 to even 20 years ago, where people thought the industry will go, where people thought the technology will go. What is the biggest surprise from today's standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of water under the bridge in the BI space, right? It has been something that's been a very challenging space to work in and solve problems in the space. It's a complicated beast, right? It's not a simple problem to solve, and there's many problems to solve. I think that's the other one. There's just data. The volume of data is growing. The complexity of data is increasing. The speed of data is increasing. So I think all of those things come together. And, we talked about the perfect storm. I mean, this is the perfect storm of complexity that's very difficult to solve. So therein lies massive opportunity, which I've always believed about the space. And I've been, beating the BI analytic, big data, whatever you want to call it, drum for decades now. But I think the biggest surprise is just I'll probably be a little bit of a pessimist on this one, is that I'm surprised how little progress we've made in some regards, right? And you and I think we had a little bit of a dialogue on this on LinkedIn a while back. And, I think for me, I look at what we have done, or what I've done, and we as companies have done. And I look at sort of the drum we were beating about, data is hard. It's in all these different silos. It's hard to get access to it. We got to mash it together and then build technologies on top to be able to analyze this data and get it to the right people at the right time to be able to make decisions. And I feel like that story is somewhat continued to be beat up. I can literally take some of the copy from our brochures in Crystal in 1992 and put them on top of the exact same messages of companies today. Exactly. I can't tell you how many times I get startups that come and pitch me on their big, cool analytics solution. And it literally is almost verbatim the copy that we had in our Crystal, marketing materials in 1992. So I think that's one of the things. I think we've made a bunch of progress in cloud, certainly. And I think that there's been some definite innovations around cloud warehousing, cloud data storage, and the likes of Amazon and and Google and so on have done a great job sort of building out this elastic cloud world that we have. But I think that's the data part. But I still think we're living in a world of people are still struggling to transition into this new world. And so I think the BI industry and the analytic industry has struggled a little bit. It's been somewhat stagnant. And even if you look at historically, if you look in between the time we started Crystal to the kind of the mid 2000s, it was kind of status quo. There's a few acquisitions like ours. And then all of a sudden it was like, guerrilla domination, if you want to call it that, sort of in the mid 2000s. And so all the big players were kind of the big de facto players. And, I always used to joke that, if you look at the Gardner list or the Magic Quadrant or whatever you want to call it, I used to make fun and say there's like, I think at one time there was like 585 BI and analytic companies on that list. I don't know what the exact number is anymore, but I used to say it was 585 companies on this list and 580 of them are for sale.
Yeah.
Because basically it was like 5 of them were the real players that were doing everything. And everybody else was just swarming around going, can I find a niche that I can then, become a big company, which was hard, or one of these guys has got to buy me, right? Like, come on, someone just give me an offer and buy my company. And I think that's been the challenge. And then I think they struggled to, the big BI players struggled somewhat because they started to become big behemoth. Consolidation started to happen. They started buying up all these companies. And then you got this big, brittle, behemoth kind of monolithic technology that then, of course, the likes of a Tableau and, Click and, these kind of companies start coming up and they do start getting some market share, right? So you started seeing some shift later on in, kind of, I guess, the 2014-15 zone. There started to be a lot more activity in that. So I think that, that really started to kind of shift things. But I think that it's been interesting because it's just been a little bit stagnant. So I was kind of hoping we were going to have our iPhone moment to some extent. I don't think we're quite there yet. I'm not saying I know what the exact solution is. If I did, I would have a killer idea right now and I'd be launching another startup in this space. But so I think there's lots of opportunity still, I guess, is really the bottom line of being somewhat pessimistic and kind of beating up on us as an industry. But I'm also saying that means there's still tons of opportunity here to innovate. The question is, can we find a place for the complexity to go is really the challenge.
I would agree. I can share my iPhone view in the late 2000s when I was part of Business Objects myself was the promise of predictive analytics. Everybody was talking about that. Everybody was investing in that. And we are in 2021 and we are still talking about predictive analytics being one of the killer values that BI will deliver. And we are still not there. I do wanna go back a little bit to the cloud analytics platform you've been building, and I was part of, as you mentioned, Indicee. I saw a pitch recently of another component of another product that almost looks exactly like what we were trying to do over a decade ago at Indicee. And I was chatting with my co-founder and CTO Milan. He was part of Indicee at some point as well, and he was like, "This looks exactly like what Indicee was trying to do." So in way, you can argue Indicee was a little bit early, ahead of the time, with the idea of automatically getting the data integrated and modeled so you can make the dashboarding and reporting easy. Is there something you would do differently now than you look back a decade later? Whether it's the technology, the business model, the product functionality side, if you would go back, would you do it all over again, or would you approach it differently?
Yeah, I mean, look, hindsight's, the classic saying. It certainly, I would do things differently, but I do think there was sort of a little bit of that perfect storm that we talked about. So I think that one of the things that we did with one of the struggles that we've had in the analytic BI industry was that it was always very technology, IT, very centric around software developers. Like our play in the Crystal world was very software developer centric. And then it became more IT centric as we started building out, more kind of front facing, user facing, but we still couldn't get to the business user. So the vision of Indicee and then a lot of these cloud analytic tools that exist today, like, Burst and Good Data and Domo and, all these guys are basically, it was like, can we empower the business user to do this? And that's really was the vision of Indicee is, can we take the entire workflow of BI and analytics and roll it all into one application, put a user experience on it and dumb it down and make it easy and charge $20 a month, right? I mean, it was sort of like, can we combine consumer and enterprise together? And that was kind of the early days. And, back in 2008-ish, when we started Indicee, it was, Salesforce was kind of the king of the cloud castle. Yeah. And there really wasn't any other player. So we were very early in the market. So, we were venture backed. It was kind of the exciting new industry. So I think a lot of times when you're building these companies, timing is everything, right? So the question is, why now? I think we were just early. We had a good exit. Did we get $1 billion exit like Looker? No, or whatever the number was. But what I will say to your point around the pitch is that if you look at Looker and you look at what our pitch deck was, it's almost verbatim exactly And in fact, after, I got a pitch deck from Looker after we exited Indicee, and someone sent me a VC sent me a pitch deck and said, "Look familiar?" And I mean, it was like, if you look at Looker, it had so even today, if you go on their website, so much of what we're doing. So anyways, that's kind of a high level. I think there was a lot of players all trying to figure this out with similar ideas. Is that, can we dumb this down? If I was to rewind, I would probably get more focused, which is what I tell all my startup founders now that I work with is, we were trying to boil all the oceans, right? And I always think it's like, if you were just to do one thing, what would it be? And what we were really good at, which was on the data access, aggregation, modeling, getting the data set up for people to be able to do analytics on it. I think we would have been better off just cutting off our user experience and focusing on the modeling side of it, and potentially, very, very early version of a snowflake, or something like that, like, kind of a 2010 version of a snowflake where, you can kind of put data in the cloud, model it, and tell that story and really double down and focus on it. Because I think we were really strong at it, and we had a whole bunch of people from Crystal that were really good at this stuff. And that would have been a great place, I think, to be, rather than trying to solve the entire problem. Because I think a lot of people have tried that and they've raised hundreds of millions of dollars, and the businesses, quite frankly, are upside down, and they're there's no ROI on these things.
Yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned it, because focus is something we discuss in my new business a lot of the time. And we decided to focus on the area you mentioned, the data integration, right? Getting the data together, prepare it for reporting, don't focus on the user experience. There's a term that the industry is starting to use, data engineering. It's predicated on the idea that there is another technology layer, like the middle layer, if you will, where this work happens. It doesn't happen in the BI reporting tool. It doesn't happen in the dashboarding level, right? It happens somewhere else. So I'm curious what your view is. What's your recommendation for people trying to implement a solution today? Should they start from the top of the stack and pick your reporting analytics platform and then work your way down? Should you focus on the middle layer, do a great job at the engineering side, getting the data together, clean it up, put the security around it? How would you approach it?
Well, look, if you were to if I rewind your other question, I'll kind of roll it into one thing. So I think that the other kind of surprising area for me of what I thought the future would hold a little bit is, I think there's a lot of cultural stuff inside of organizations that need to be put in place in order to execute on these analytic BI strategies that I think organizations struggle a little bit with. Because in the startup ecosystem, when we pick startups as investors, if you take a VC or an individual investor, the cream rises to the top, because there's a process, there's a diligence process when the best companies win, the best founders, the best ideas to get funded. I think the challenge with BI project, you look at them like a startup inside of a big company. It's like, hey, we're going to launch this initiative to build a warehouse inside of the organization. It's like, do you have the skills and the right people doing it? So do you have the killer team that's going to execute on the project? And have they've been provided the training and the knowledge that they brought in the right people to execute? It's to me, it's like diet and exercise, right? 80% of it is like what you eat. It's not how much you exercise. And I think a lot of cases in the analytic world, it's actually about the people and the culture and the setting up the right objectives, putting the right teams together. And are you solving the right problem? Which is a classic challenge with this stuff, is people are so focused on buying technology and mashing data together, and they're just kind of a little bit of the Wild West. I don't know. People told us we got to do data stuff. Let's just take data and make decisions. It's like, well, what decisions do you want to make? Like what do you actually want to do? Let's sit down and think deeply about the problems that we're trying to solve. And then from that, execute a process to decide how you're going to do that. And it does start with the data. And I think there's a little bit of, obviously, there's an evaluation of what tooling you want to use from an analytic perspective. But I think you got to understand what data is available to you, what problems you want to solve with your data, and can you get there? I've talked to many, enterprises where they're like, well, we want to do this. And then we end up in a data exploration exercise. Like, well, you don't even have that data. You can't actually solve that problem because you don't have access to that data. You're not creating that data inside your organization. So where are you going to find that data? Oh, well, I guess we're going to go buy it. Well, where is it? Like, how are you going to access it? So So I think that a lot of it is sitting down and setting the right goals and objectives and putting the right teams on these projects in order to be successful, right? Before you even get into picking technologies, right? And then choosing whether you're going to use Snowflake or you're going to use good data or whatever. I think if you have a sound process for that, choosing the technology becomes easier because you have clarity. And that clarity will then allow you to rule out, well, we don't need these. We don't need AI, or we don't need, predictive, because we're not trying to do predictive work. So we don't need to run around analyzing predictive technology. So the focus allows you to eliminate and focus on narrowing it down to maybe 4 or 5 vendors that then you go, okay, well, what's the best for us? So that's one of the things that I see.
I have to admit, I'm pleased with the answer. It's not about the technology. Yeah, the technology matters, and how you break down your stack matters, and where you focus in which part of the stack matters. But you have to start with the why first, and what are we trying to accomplish first. You have a strategy around that one. Yeah, I want to get to the technology side a little bit, but I do want to ask a question around data science and advanced analytics. You mentioned a little bit earlier. Obviously, there's more data than ever, right? We still have some of the old problems. We have more data than ever. There is a driver for becoming data-centric, data-driven decisions and all that. And sounds like today everybody thinks that data science or advanced analytics or a combination of both is the answer to the growing problem of data. What's your view on the state of those two today? And what's your thoughts on the impact of the analytics industry overall to the various businesses today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, look, I mean, I think that I'm super excited about what's to come, right? And as far as like what we have, and there's a lot of work around AI, and I'm looking at startups every day that are living in this world, machine learning and AI and all these kind of cool, neat technologies. But I guess it really comes back to, again, what little bit of what I was just saying is that, are the goals and objectives lined up with the technologies that you actually need and want, rather than just saying, I don't know, we're supposed to go get all this predictive stuff, so let's go buy predictive, which is what a lot of enterprises end up doing. And so, I think that the tenets of the analytics world of sort of descriptive, predictive, prescriptive are true, right? I think there's opportunities in all of those. But a lot of times it's like, well, what are people really trying to do, and do they need those things, right? So I'm not negative on any of those things. I think that some of them are very early stages. Like I see tons of startups telling sort of an AI, machine learning, in either an applied analytics world or a pure analytics world. And a lot of times when I dig in with the founders, I sort of question, like, why are you telling an AI story? This is actually not really AI. You're just doing basic. This is not AI, right? So, but I think there's a tendency in our world, and the big enterprises are, guilty of this, and the small, startups are guilty of this, is that it's a little bit of buzzword bingo, right? Everybody, you got to say AI, you got to say machine learning, because that's what gets the money and that's what gets the customers. So there's a little bit of this, we got to put it in our marketing materials and stick it on our website, because that's what everybody's hunting for, even though a lot of those technologies may not be those things, right? And but they wrap it in this kind of AI machine learning and go, that's what we do, right? But it's not really. It's just analytics stuff that we've been doing for decades, the same way, right?
If I can jump on the bandwagon and share an anecdotal experience, I feel academia and a lot of the businesses are also contributing to the buzz. As we were launching the business, we posted job openings for data engineer, data architect, data scientist. We got close to 200. This was 10 to 12 days running the ads. We got over 200 applications for data scientists, much more closer to 10, 12, 15 for data engineers, data architects. And a lot of the data scientists that applied were mostly fresh out of school or with 1 year experience. I'm reading into the data here, but I feel that the term data science, which means different things to different people, became very attractive. We get people to go for masters in data science, PhD in data science. We post those jobs openings, and it's a wide variety of people that apply to that, because there's the promise of you're going to work with the data, you're going to analyze data, you're going to find valuable insights and help the business in some unimaginable way, etc. Right? But there's no investment in the why, as you said, right? Just get the people, just get the skill, and there is no investment in the infrastructure needed to actually go and connect all the data you have before you can start analyzing it, before you can gain insights, right? So I wanted to quickly ask you, what's your view on the term data science, and do you feel that it's just a transitionary thing, that it's going to evolve into different things in the future, or is it here to stay and it's going to be a valuable set of skills that every company needs to acquire?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I used to get a little bit resistant around it because in sort of our time, these were called business analysts, right? And then of course it got sexier, and we called it data science, and the technologies were evolving, so the complexity was evolving, and so this kind of new name of data science came up because they felt like they were doing a lot more than a business analyst was doing, because they had more sophisticated analysis work that was being done with more sophisticated technologies. So I don't have a lot of resistance to it. Look, I think this, the concept of the data engineer and the data scientist can be, work together. I think that, the data engineering is, the classic is sort of they're the plumbers of the system that are, pulling the data through and building the piping in order to get the data. And really the data scientists are really kind of deriving the value and the insights and kind of showing the decision making, the costing and the forecasting. So they're kind of more of the, well, how do we access that data and be able to do something with it? So I don't have a resistance to the term. I mean, I do think that in the, back to your recruiting comment, I think that it does help from a compensation perspective and so on. I think there's a little bit of a packaging thing that has happened that's been beneficial to people that have positioned themselves effectively in the data science world, because the compensations for those roles are significantly higher than a business analyst role, right? But in a lot of cases, when the rubber hits the road, the business analysts and the data scientists are probably doing pretty similar things, right? And I'm not taking a knock on data scientists at all. I think there are very sophisticated, smart, brilliant, true data scientists out there that are doing things that are but I think in the typical enterprise, there are some basic fundamental analytic work that needs to be done that is probably close to what a business analyst can do and maybe what a data scientist is doing.
Some of the problem is that there's an expectation of more technical experience with the data scientists, and they often get asked, based on our interviews with customers, they often get asked to do data engineering work, but they don't have the software engineering or the SQL type of experience in order to deal with those tasks, right? So that's part of the challenge. There are externalities to everything. There are trade-offs to everything. And the fact that they're being paid more means that there is less budget to also hire a data engineer, which means they're being asked to do data engineering work. A business analyst typically is not asked to do data engineering work because there's no expectation for that technical expertise, right? Anyway, it's a whole rabbit hole we can go down into.
Totally. Yeah. Agreed.
I did wanted to bring it a little bit relevant to the business we're running. Obviously, we are partnering with Snowflake, and they made a big splash with the IPO. And they've been pushing this narrative and vision, and they're actually executing, in my view, pretty well on the vision of a data cloud, which is a platform in its own right, a cloud in its own right. It's really a global network where you can do data sharing, you can exchange data safely and securely and all of that. And there is a big vision. The CEO of Snowflake has the vision of businesses running their entire supply chain, all the vendor relations, all the partnerships, all the data exchange happening on that data cloud, right? Which is for me as an entrepreneur, building a business around that obviously is very compelling. So I wanted to ask you if that resonates with you, the notion of a global mesh, global network where data gets exchanged between businesses, and what potential you see if this gets really realized at global scale.
Yeah, look, I drank the Kool-Aid in 2006 on cloud. So you're preaching to the choir here, right? I think that the friction that has been in the BI space and the analytics space in general, in most of the areas has been related to the data and where the data is residing, the complexity and the number of silos, but also the fact that we have most of the data on-prem. Now, hopefully, more moving into the cloud. I think that in a perfect world, if we could imagine a world where all the data was in the cloud, everything, like all our systems of record, all of our analytic data, everything was living in a cloud that we could easily be able to use services to talk to each other and have it in sort of one ecosystem, if you will. I think will open floodgates for new opportunities in the BI tooling. I think there's a bunch of opportunity there, but I do think that there's work to be done in the sense of we still have to get the majority of the enterprises that are sitting out there that are living in sort of on-premise land still to get their data up there as well. Because the complexity there is, well, how do I drag all this data around? And we've got lots of technologies and tooling that are doing that now, but it's still creating friction. And so in a perfect world, if everybody just used cloud applications, and that was something we did back in Indicee where we had a big decision, we didn't do it. We spent a lot of our time munging data from on-prem and cloud, flat files, it just was complex. There was a time where it was like, why don't we just forget about on-prem and only focus on cloud vendors? So we just provide analytic solutions. We only create data connectors to cloud vendors, and therefore we can just get access to Salesforce, and the list goes on of the cloud vendors at the time. We didn't do that because the majority of the data was still locked up in on-prem. And so it would have been very hard to go win customers that way if we said, oh, well, you got data on-prem? Sorry, we're not your guys. So now I think you could do that. You could probably say, no, we're only going to work with people that have their data in the cloud. If you don't have the data in the cloud, we don't work. We don't do anything for you. If you're a small business, you could easily do that, right? So I'm not suggesting that's your strategy per se, but I'm just saying that's a possibility. So I totally resonate with it. So I think then what happens is, when's our iPhone moment going to happen? So if we believe that, look, there's going to be more snowflakes that are going to happen, right? We've got there, they had this massive IPO, great success. Too bad Coinbase came along, but anyways, they got beat on that one. But the reality is that they've demonstrated that there's a vision there and people believe in that vision. Meanwhile, the Silicon Valley over there was kind of spinning their wheels on Hadoop and, things that were sort of going nowhere. And then Snowflake comes along and does this and everybody's like, whoa. So I think that really shook up the industry, and I think there's going to be more players that are going to do it. And I think as that becomes a thing where data in the cloud truly become, and COVID and the acceleration of digital transformation will rapidly move data more and more into the cloud, then I think it creates an opportunity for the BI vendors and tooling vendors to then say, well, how do we get into a world that we can, do what Snowflake did, but on the tooling side? And I think there's changes that can happen over there, just in the way we package and price our software, which I think is living in dinosaur land. That needs to be completely changed, which is creating friction. And then, different types of architectures to be able to truly live in the cloud and be able to make data flow easier. So.
Yeah, I can share another anecdote that I think is driving some of this trend about being able to use the cloud for exchanging data, not necessarily reporting on data that's already in the cloud. The data may arrive in the cloud through connectors and ingestions and whatnot. But we are working with a number of fintech organizations, and they're sharing with us that the big banks that they're selling into and partnering with, they are demanding that they use Snowflake for exchanging data. Instead of shipping CSVs, setting up FTPs and stuff like that, running ETL pipelines, the bank says, if you're going to be a supplier, if you're going to be a vendor, if I'm going to partner with you, you have to use Snowflake for interacting, sharing your data and accessing my data, which is interesting, right? I've never seen that before in the industry where the bigger organizations demand.
Well, big win for Snowflake on those types of movements, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to give a chance to Beverly. There are a few questions from the audience. If we can take a look at those, Beverly.
Yes. So I have one here for you. So attendee here says, Mark mentioned that the field of BI is made of a large number of different problems coming together in a perfect storm of complexity. A lot of these problems are being tackled by a large number of players in the industry. So the question that is for Mark is, in your opinion, what is the problem of BI that has yet to be properly addressed? And is complexity the biggest problem in the BI space right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've touched on it a little bit. I think that the the fundamental problem in most BI projects starts with data and where the data resides. Can we get access to all the data we need to solve the problem we're trying to solve? And I think fundamentally, if I look back and in all the businesses I've done in this space, even if you look at the old days when we did Crystal, a lot of the challenges we had at Crystal was people would say, well, we won't buy Crystal reports until we get our data warehouse in place. So it was always this, well, we're going to wait until we get our data problem solved. And in every business that I've built, it was the same story. It was like, do we have our data organized before we can start looking at the tooling? So I think that fundamentally, I still think that that's the biggest challenge is, can we make that frictionless? And when we do make that frictionless, then I think it will force all the tooling vendors to reevaluate the entire sort of data value chain and the way that they think about building their technologies and make them truly cloud enabled, and switch the way that they're operating architecturally and from a business model perspective in order to be able to kind of provide our iPhone moment if that ever comes. But I do think that we're still a ways away from even solving the data problem and having a really slick structure and architecture for the way that we put data in the cloud. And I think Snowflake's a great step in that direction.
If I may step in and ask a prediction question, and you can be reckless if you want. I heard a mix of pessimism and optimism for the future for you. So I'm looking forward to your view. If you look at, say, 10 years or 5 years, whatever is reasonable horizon, what do you think are the biggest challenges and opportunities that will drive innovation? And what types of innovation you would like to see happen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've been kind of hinting at them. I think that I think that from a business model perspective, I think we're kind of long in the tooth around, software as a service is relatively new, but it's been around for a while. And I think we're a little bit stuck in this concept of seat-based pricing and individual user-based pricing. So I think there's a different model, and obviously there's a lot of movement in other markets and other industries, the Twilios of the world, and usage-based pricing, and it's kind of like all the BI vendors are kind of like, yeah, we're going to democratize this and we're going to put it, and we did this at Crystal. It was like everybody and my mom were going to use it. That was kind of our internal mantra that we used to kind of say. And, but we're also saying, but it's going to cost you, $300 a subscription or a seat or whatever it is. So can we kind of wipe that out and just say, look, we're going to put it in the hands of everybody. Everybody gets access to this. There's no cost on a per seat basis. So the question is, how do we innovate and still be able to monetize, but put it in the hands of everybody? And so usually ends up some form of a usage-based, access-based pricing model that I think is needed. So I guess my prediction in the future is somebody's going to do this, and I don't know how they're going to do it and what that's going to look like exactly. But I think that especially on the tooling side, someone's going to just start saying, no, we're doing it this way. And then, technically speaking, I think that there's just, are there slicker, easier ways to get access to almost creating sort of a service bus, so to speak, that sits on top of these data clouds that allow you to access data from anywhere, from any device, whether you're a developer building an app or whether you're using a tool set. There's some kind of a data as a service layer type of concept that will start to come into play once all the data is in the cloud, that will allow more of a free flow. And then the tooling vendors can start sitting on top of this layer and make it a lot easier. I mean, we still have, a lot of these desktop tools like a Tableau. It's like, oh, you got to put a CSV file. It's like, it's just not there yet, right? So I'm hoping that we can kind of eliminate that. What that looks like, I don't know, but I'm excited to see some startups that might might have those great ideas, right? So
I like the framing data as a service layer. It does speak to why I chose Snowflake to partner with, because they are making that investment. Are they there yet? Probably not. More innovation is needed. But I like that concept. We had infrastructure as a service layer, obviously, for a long time, and there's strong players, and the cloud revolves around them. And I love those technologies, and I built a successful business before around those technologies. But data is the sort of the next frontier. Funny enough, right? I mean, we talked about going back to 25 years in the industry and kind of solving still the same problems, but it feels like it's the next frontier where there could be a breakthrough that we can call like the new cloud is sitting at the data, and it is an exciting opportunity for me. Hopefully, we don't sit here 10 years in the future and saying we are back to the same problems.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, and certainly I don't want to leave with a pessimistic view. I think there's a ton of opportunity. The question is whether I think there's got to be some more radical thinking, if you will, and bravery to be able to embark on those new initiatives. And but everybody wants to make money. You got VCs investing and they want to make money. And so people are trying to figure out how to make money at the same time that they are trying to innovate and do something, crazy and make that big change. So, but, look, there's more big IPOs on the horizon like Snowflake that I think are going to be in the space. So.
Absolutely. Looking forward to that. I do have a few more rapid fire type questions that we can use for the remaining few minutes we have. I think we just got another question. I want to give the audience a chance. Beverly?
Sure.
Yeah, so one more question just came through. It says, Mark gets a lot of companies pitching at him regarding data analytics solutions, and he mentioned that a lot of it is very similar to back in the days of Crystal Report. Does he have examples of startups in that field that caught his attention as being fundamentally different in their approach? What about those made him take note?
So the answer is no. I don't obviously see all startups. So I'm sure there are companies out there trying to do it. I think that what I see most of now is companies that are utilizing data in more of an applied analytics sense. And so I'm seeing very interesting companies in very specific domains that are utilizing data analytics, predictive AI, all of these different technologies, but in very specific domains in energy efficiency or in microbiology areas. And I'm just trying to think of all the things that I put money into or I've seen pitches of, but from a pure play BI perspective, I've not seen something yet where someone has come in and said, I have a radical new vision of the world that I think is going to win. And because usually what ends up happening is I go, this just sounds like more of the same. It feels very incremental. It doesn't feel like a game-changing technology. So if you have them, let me know, but I've not seen them yet.
Awesome. Let me try a couple of questions. I'm going to indulge myself a little bit. What's your favorite Crystal Reports feature from the early days?
Crystal Reports features from the early days. It was funny. I actually was involved in a project at Microsoft in the very early days. I spent 5 months at Microsoft. We had a huge partnership with Microsoft, as people may remember. We bundled into a lot of their products as OEMs. We built a funky tool that allowed you to access data from their mainframe reporting. So they would spit out mainframe reports, and then we built a technology that allowed them to essentially mine those flat files and then take that data and put it into the structured format, which then loaded it into their SQL Server database. And then we put Crystal on top of it to do all these analytics. So it kind of became this stealth part of Crystal that we never actually released, but it was sort of under the covers that if you knew how to get it, you could utilize it. And but we rolled it out at Microsoft globally, and they used it because they had mainframes, but this is back in the 90s. They had, massive mainframes still pumping out a lot of their reporting. Believe it or not, man, I feel old. But it was something that obviously had a limited lifespan because the mainframe world was dying, but it was kind of a cool feature, and it worked really well. So
another quick one: how would you explain data engineering to a CEO, a non-technical CEO?
Yeah, I mean, we touched on it a little bit. I think that the data engineering is really kind of the plumber that's going to kind of create the piping and pull the data together. I think the data engineer is a little bit different than a plumber because I view that there's a requirement by a data engineer to provide quality water to the consumer. And so I think that's a big fundamental difference, is that it's not just like, hey, we just got a pipe and I don't, that's not my job, is to get the good water to you. That's the city's job. I think in the data engineering world, it is their job. And so they need to be thoughtful about what data they are passing through their plumbing, right? And so, what's being delivered needs to be, it has to have quality. So I think there's a different mindset of a data engineer than just being a pipeline. So that's kind of how I describe it if I was to try to articulate to someone that understood it.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love the view of the quality of the water as well. It's not just the piping. I've been using the piping metaphor, right? The digging the ditches and putting the pipes, etc. But you touched on the quality aspect, which is very different than a typical what that metaphor does. I think I know the answer to this one. Everybody talks about data as oil, data as food. Would you feel data as water is a better metaphor to use, or you have some other one?
Yeah, I think so. I think look, the oil thing has been beat up. There's like a lot of people that are just, the intent of that data as a new oil was, it was a basic kind of, hey, we got to do something with it to get value from it. But I think, I like to think of it more on the renewable concept. So I think water is, solar, wind, whatever. I think that the renewable model is a little bit better of a description. And, I think that the other thing with data is that it comes with great responsibility, right? So I think that we've all been seeing the challenges of, we're amassing all this data, and how are organizations and enterprises using that data? Are they using it for good? Or are they using it for not so good? And I think that, that comes with culturally, I think hopefully, as we move into the future, people are continuing to look at, it's a renewable, it's a valuable renewable, but we need to use it for goodness, right? So I hope that enterprises continue to think about it that way.
That's awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate this perspective. I'm going to borrow some of this in our conversations with customers. I think we always come up with better analogies and better ways to have discussions and make sure we understand and translate from one domain to another. So this is very useful. Before I let you go, I do want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to join you on that Indicee ride. You kind of sent me off on a path towards cloud. I left sort of a cushy job at SAP. Where I joined a crazy startup, crazy technology, learning about Amazon Web Services and all that. And that kind of took me in a completely different trajectory that led to me becoming an entrepreneur. So I'm very grateful for helping me in those early days, and grateful for the support you're giving us by joining us on this webinar today on this new venture. So thank you. This was fun.
Yeah, thank you, Kima, and best of luck in the new venture, and let me know how I can help.
Awesome. Thank you. And thanks for everybody attending. Hopefully this was insightful.